The Pale Blue Eye is a whodunit released on Netflix this past December. The story follows Augustus Landor, played by Christian Bale. He's summoned to investigate a grisly murder at West Point Academy in New York. Assisting him is the one and only Edgar Allan Poe, played by Harry Melling, and I couldn't quite put my finger on where I'd seen him before, but by God, it's Dudley Dursley from Harry Potter. The director Scott Cooper must have enjoyed Harry Potter because he casted Wormtail and Dobby as well. Overall, I found the movie alright the first time, with trivial complaints. The second time I watched it was more enjoyable in the first half, but left a few glaring errors I'll point out at the end of the video. This murder mystery leads to a rather enthralling conclusion if you can make it there. I say if you can make it there because the movie is very much a slow burner. It has a 2-hour and 8-minute runtime that could have easily been cut by 10 or 15 minutes to help with its pacing. If you try watching it after a long day in the office, you'll find yourself dozing off. It's not that there's nothing of interest during this time, it's a combination of the depressing weather, atmosphere, and the melancholic tone that most of the actors use. Since it came out so recently, I'm going to attempt to give this review without spoiling it as much as possible. Anything that I say that seems big is going to be announced in the first 10 minutes. Almost every aspect of this movie is bleak. The scenes have a dark overtone and filter, most of the characters are forlorn, and even the stones in the snow have a sarcophagal feeling about them. This is a motif that is constant throughout the film's entirety. It is a work of Poe after all, so it's expected they pay homage to the master of macabre himself. There are instances that allude to sickness by consumption, the disease that took the lives of almost every woman that Poe loved. You can see ravens flying about, and at one point he references the poem Lenore. If you're familiar with the poem, you'll know right away this is meant to forebode the viewer. This can serve as a decent setup for a payoff later to one who is adequately informed, but could be lost to one who isn't. I'm a firm believer that a movie should stand on its own, without having to use other media to help it along, but in this particular case I can give it a pass. It's an acquired taste that attracts a certain viewer. For the most part, that viewer is one who is well versed in everything Edgar Allan Poe. You'll notice some early British, Irish, and Scottish accents in the movie. Poe's accent is supposed to be Virginian. This is among the many things about Poe that is debatable and unclear. Shit, we don't even know how he actually died. The actors have the benefit of playing something that nobody else could recognize as being wrong or viably disputed. It is plainly left to their own creativity and interpretation from books, secondhand witnesses, and historians. This goes for every bit of the acting. Allow me to elaborate. We have no way of verifying whether any of the acting in this film is an accurate representation of what it was like in the early 1800s. Our story was set in 1830, phonographs were only invented in 1877, and video recording started sometime shortly after in the form of silent films. There's somewhere around a 300-year gap between the time English colonists settled and the first voice recordings were taken, so we don't have the faintest idea of what anybody sounded like during that time. In short, this makes any criticism offered in that regard completely speculative and therefore subjective. This goes for any media set during that period, whether the feedback is negative or positive. Daniel Day-Lewis's portrayal of Abraham Lincoln won him an Oscar for Best Actor in 2013, yet the performance was still all his own interpretation. Bearing all that in mind, anything I have to say about the acting should be taken with a grain of salt. I consider Christian Bale to be one of the greatest actors of our time. He consistently gives riveting performances where he ceases to be himself and becomes a completely new human being. This makes it hard to question anything that he does on screen, but I did notice this weird voice cracking thing that he does as Augustus that I found distracting.
Did you see this officer's face?
You might be onto something there, Captain Hitchcock.
It's like a cold draft suddenly makes it through the lining of his pants and his balls take a vacation to visit his belly button. Everything else from Bale is spot on. The look of his character and the feelings that he conveys are all on par with previous performances. Harry Melling was a great casting decision for the role of Edgar Allan Poe. He has the same distinctive, odd look that the real Poe does. His emotions and on-screen presence were great, but I found his portrayal of Poe to be a little too animated for my taste. This isn't how I pictured the famous author in my mind. I would expect him to be more shy and reticent, but ultimately Melling would never be able to get that right for every fan anyway. I also feel as though any of Poe's eccentric personality taken away from the screen would have made the film feel slower, which it definitely did not need. Note to Scott Cooper, if you need to implement a court jester to speed things up, your movie may be a little slow. As I've clearly expressed, my main concern with the film is pacing, and some of the points to follow I think could have helped speed it up. I recognize that other complaints that I have are pretty nitpicky, but
calls him like I see you.
Within the first 10 minutes, we get a ham-fisted exposition dump. Most of this could be inferred throughout the first act at different times. It is detailed to us to build tensions between the Academy and Augustus as early on as possible. I find this completely unnecessary, as there's already enough of that shown throughout the film. I mean, just after their little tiff, Captain Hitchcock tells Augustus not to drink, and the first place he goes is the local bar. You have to admire the guy's defiance.
There will be no drinking throughout the course of this investigation.
To rules.
There are a few different scenes where we're shown Augustus pacing around pensively. These are to demonstrate that he's working on the case, but surprise, surprise, this is a murder mystery and we can deduce that through conjecture. There's a point in the film where Poe claims to be sick with what appears to be positional vertigo, but the term vertigo as it's known in medical studies wasn't coined until 1879. This is one of those rare inconsistencies that I only notice because I have loved ones who suffer from it. Though once I notice something like this, it makes me question other things in the movie as it goes on. For example, the card game being played and whether it's supposed to exist in the movie's timeline. I would consider this a minor failure of research, and for most it'll go unnoticed. In other movies, failing to research something that the viewer has better knowledge of can be more pronounced and ruin the experience for the target audience. I mean, how many times have you seen an action-adventure or spy movie that didn't research the proper handling and use of firearms? This isn't the case in The Pale Blue Eye. It isn't nearly as severe, but I found it evident nonetheless. At the end of the day, The Pale Blue Eye has a great story to be told, but has major issues in the manner in which it is told. As in every murder mystery, the last act provides revelations that will fill in the blanks for the viewer. The way that you have to slog through the first hour of this movie makes the finale a juxtaposition too enormous for proper effect. It's a damn shame that this is the case, because the second time you watch the movie, this feeling is lessened due to newfound perspective, but I highly doubt many will attempt this. The rest of this video will be a discussion of details and will contain spoilers. If you haven't watched the movie, leave off.
Leave up! Leave up! Leave up! Leave up!
I greatly enjoy that the second murdered victim, Ballinger, was castrated. I really wish that Poe would have highlighted that detail in the finale and let it be known to Augustus that it was justified. Maybe Poe could have asked if Ballinger was still alive when he became a eunuch. Wouldn't that be a fun detail to know? There are several things the movie didn't explain well enough that the book probably did. I have not read the book prior to doing this review, but it should never be necessary to do such a thing. The movie should stand on its own. With that in perspective, I have questions. What is the significance of the first seance the Marquise family conducted? Why does it have to be done multiple times with the same heart? The movie implies that the first ritual they conducted used Fry's heart, as did the second one.
Fry's heart, very likely placed. Sorry.
It's Fry's heart, no?
The reading that Poe gives us from the unnamed book by Pierre de Lancre says,
The contents of a witch's Sabbath feast are confined to the following sundries: unclean animals such as are never eaten by Christian peoples, the hearts of unbaptized children, and the hearts of hanged men.
Does Leah Marquise need all of these to live? Why does Poe have to be there for the ritual at the end of the movie? He is neither a hanged man nor is he unbaptized. Did the book change that part of history to make him unbaptized without the movie stating it? Did the Marquise family mistake him for being an unclean animal never eaten by Christian people? He does kind of look like a gargoyle, but I'd imagine they would put him outside of the circle standing watch or something. Does any human being, for that matter, constitute an animal that a Christian wouldn't eat? At the beginning of the movie, we're inclined to believe that the Marquise family refused to do this crazy witchcraft because they wouldn't outright kill somebody. They would only do it if they happened upon any of the previously discussed witches' Sabbath feast items. What changed them into believing cold-blooded murder was perfectly fine? Sure, it could be that Leah's condition has worsened and they became desperate, but that still doesn't explain why Poe has to be the one to have his heart cut out. I'm getting the feeling the film removed a very important scene depicting Augustus reading a few lines from De Course de Diable. He finds that book awfully fast when confronting Dr. Marquise, by the way. We see him once looking at the book while it's on the shelf, but we never see him pick it up. There's no way that he could have read the title from the top of the book while it was still on the shelf pre-confrontation, because upon slamming it on Dr. Marquise's desk, he flips the book, showing us that it was upside down. Something is missing here, and if you have more context, I'd really like an answer. I already gave a conclusion to this review in the spoiler-free section, and I don't plan on doing